Hey, friends and listeners of the Switch for Good podcast. Yep, that's you. I have some really exciting news. Dotsie and I have started a Switch for Good podcast Facebook group. We created it so we can build a community of fans that will help us improve the show and deliver on the topics that you want to learn more about. So we want to hear what your favorite content is, what you want more of, and what you want less of. And if you like the length of the show, Dotsie and I are always talking about the length of the show, right, Dotsie?
Yes.
We want to tailor our show around the needs and desires of our incredible listeners, almost 500,000 of you. And it's really simple to join. Just go to our Switch for Good Facebook page. That's Switch, the number 4, and then Good. And then click on groups. And there we are, the Switch for Good podcast chat. You can post directly in the group, share ideas, talk to other listeners, and connect with like-minded folks. So go, run, join our Facebook group and tell us what you want.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. We're so glad that you're with us. Welcome to the Switch for Good podcast. I'm Dotsie, and I am here with Alexandra.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm ready. I'm ready to take my test, Dotsie.
You're ready? You're nervous?
Yes.
Shaking in your boots? Yeah, we've been having fun kind of doing these quizzes for our listeners in the sphere of performance and health and environment and animals and all the many reasons that people might want to move over to plant-based diet. We're trying to do it in a way where people can remember these stats, which is part repetition, right? We talk about it and then have a little bit of a conversation. So today we are going to dive into the environment in dairy. And you are a staunch environmentalist and know so many stats. And I know a lot of stuff about dairy. So we're going to see how you do. We're going to keep it simple today. I've just got 4 questions for you, and they're you have to guess kind of the blank in my question. Okay. So it's just like a did you know quiz, right? So these are like 4 compelling kind of wow factor stats about dairy and the environment, and a bit of this one that's just strictly plant-based. All right. So we're just going to start off. Okay. So stretch. Yeah. Like you ready? Massage your brain. Okay. All right. First question is, did you know? All right. How many gallons of water does it take to produce only 1 gallon of milk?
Okay. Is this all in?
Well, like, am I going to give you a second chance? Yeah, I'm nice like that. I'll give you a second chance.
No. I mean, is it all like the feed and everything like that? Includes the feed?
Yes, ma'am. Great question. Yeah, this is how many gallons, let's call it, of embedded water, right? So it includes all the water that it takes. So the feed and the animals and the environment that they're living in to produce just that 1 gallon of milk. Yes.
Okay. I would say about 400 gallons of water per, oh my God, that's so high. I'm going to go lower. 300 gallons of water. 300 gallons of water for 1 gallon. Oh my God. It's huge. All right.
It's huge, but it's huger. You gotta add 700 gallons to that. It is 1,000 gallons of embedded water to produce only 1 gallon of cow's milk.
And California's in a drought, yet California's the #1 dairy state. What's wrong with us? Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That's monstrous. Like you almost don't even need to say anymore, right? Drop the mic. This quiz is over. Yeah, it's mind-boggling. It's a lot. It's a lot of water. So yes, turn off your shower if you want when you're soaping up, but more importantly, give up dairy.
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. Number 2. What percentage of people said they would eat plant-based more often to help the environment?
This is just people who said it but didn't actually do it, right? Not necessarily. They said they would.
Yeah, this is a quiz about, how many people are curious about going plant-based.
Okay. Oh, 40%? I don't know.
That's a nice guess. I think I would have been around them too, but shockingly enough, 51%. Yes.
Where are those people? Because only how many people, what percentage are actually vegan or vegetarian? I mean, what, 3%
Well,
vegan and vegetarian?
we think we're at like 5 or 6%, but this is 51% of people said they would eat plant-based more often. So
more often.
how many more people in the last 5 years are eating plant-based more often to help all sorts of reasons, but this being the environment? Probably a much larger percentage.
Yes,
than just
actually.
6% of whether it's more times per week or just more on a plate, right?
Yeah.
More plants than there is meat.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Third one. What percentage of habitable land in the US is used to grow feed for animal agriculture?
Oh my God. A huge amount, I'm sure, except for people take up a lot. I just want to say I saw the David Attenborough documentary on Netflix, A Life on Our Planet. It's really good.
So good.
And it says that only 35% of the planet is wildland, of the land mass is wildland. 35% we've left wild.
Yeah.
So, oh gosh. All right. So now I'm confusing people with stats. You want to know habitable land, how much of it is used for animals?
And in the US.
In the US.
In the US is used to grow
all right.
feed
50%. 50%.
You are super close. 41%
Wow.
of habitable land in the United States is used to grow feed for animal agriculture. That is a lot of land using to grow feed for the animals who take up a ton of space when we could just be feeding it to ourselves. And of course, we would need significantly less.
And we could rewild that land.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm 0 for 3, but this is a really good learning experience.
But you're close on all of them. I'm impressed. All right, last one. How many thousands of pounds of waste is produced by each dairy cow every year? So how many thousands of pounds of waste is produced by a dairy cow, one dairy cow, every single year?
Okay, I'm going to assume that she poops about 5 pounds. 10
only
pounds.
for
10 pounds,
the whole
10
year.
pounds of manure. No, I know, but per day. I'm trying. I'm doing
God,
that.
You can do the math. Okay.
All right, so maybe 10 pounds of manure times 365. So is that 3,600? 3,650 pounds. So 4,000 pounds of manure.
Okay. Well, this one you're not close on.
Go ahead, give it to us.
She poops 21,000 pounds of waste comes out of her each year. 21,000 pounds.
A year. Oh my God. And how many dairy cows do we have in the United States, Dotsie? Do you know?
Yeah, about 10,265,000,000 worldwide.
Okay, so somebody who's listening who has a pen can now do that math. 265 million times 21,000 a year. Okay, right. Well, and we wonder why we're having trouble disposing of that waste on the waterways, right? That's amazing.
Yeah. I think it's like it's a little over 500 million pounds of waste. Then that math.
Did you just do the math in your head?
Mm-hmm. No,
I'm smart.
No, I've got to be honest. I just pulled up my calculator in front of me. Okay. So, yeah, that could have been yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for this. It was very educational.
Yeah, it was fun. We're gonna keep it up. Yeah, you're good at it. I'm gonna bring some more environmental stats to the table to challenge you. But anyway,
now let's get an education with our guest today.
All right, looking forward to it.
So our guest is a woman of action. When something's not right, she sets out to fix it. Laura Reese went vegan in 2017, initially just to provide some relief for her allergies, but once she did her research, she was all in. Frustrated by the behemoth that is the animal ag industry and the subsidies that make consumer choice futile, she co-founded 2 organizations to fight for change. It was a dramatic shift from her 18-year career as an esteemed engineer. Laura is the co-founder of Liberation 360, formerly called the Vegan Justice League, and the CEO of Agriculture Fairness Alliance. She's currently fighting for legislation to help farmers transition to more sustainable crops. Let's dive in with Laura Reese. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. That was a lovely introduction. Who's this woman?
It's you. We have so much to traverse today. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think after doing research on you and reading about all of your extraordinary work that in the beginning, you and I both maybe felt similar feelings of frustration that launched us into action. When I started Switch for Good, it was really the impetus was based off of a dairy commercial that I saw while watching the 2018 Olympic trials. And I just had one of those I've had enough moments, and one of those somebody needs to do something about this and say something. And then maybe that should be me because it doesn't seem like anyone else is going to. So it seems like you maybe experienced a similar frustration when you realized that your choice as a consumer had no effect in the animal industry market. What am I kind of on track?
Yeah, I was pretty new to plant-based eating, and the initial sort of enthusiasm I had around, I'm voting with my dollars, really evaporated quickly when I started to contemplate subsidies. So I started reading on the website on the USDA website about just how subsidies were paid out and who they were paid to. And I just developed this low-key rage that just simmered under the surface. And I didn't really tap into it until I was on a Reddit. I was reading a Reddit AMA, and it was with a lobbyist in DC, and he was getting torn to bits by the Redditors. But I was like, that's what we need to do. And that was just kind of the idea. And then I raised money for a campaign to lobby with him. And in doing so, a donor put me in touch with Connie Spence, who was doing very similar work. You might know her as Vegan Batgirl. She did amazing vegan bat lights where she would project 7-story tall messages about what was going on in, for example, Farmer John's slaughterhouse, or any number of messages you can imagine. And she would record herself having street conversations with a lot of passerbys. But the best were when she encountered police, because this woman, she knew what the law was, and she would pull out her binder when they were trying to tell her she had to stop, and she would just show them the code, the local city ordinance, and say, I'm complying with this. What are you going to do? And she's just amazing. So we teamed up and we founded these two organizations.
Wow. I just wanted to go to one thing that you said real quick in this introduction to subsidies. So much of us know, so many of us know that meat and dairy are subsidized, but to the degree I don't think we really recognize or realize, and less than 2% of subsidies go to fruits and vegetables, and yet even the dietary guidelines say that our plate should contain, about half of our plate should contain fruits and vegetables, but they only get 2% of the subsidy money. Take us down the subsidy rabbit hole to really understand what's going on behind closed doors and why these industries are so subsidized. And maybe some of us could guess why they are, but I want to hear from you. But then why aren't fruits and vegetables almost at all, and only 2%?
Let's start. You mentioned MyPlate. Before we go into that, can I just say thank you, Dotsie, for testifying in front of the USDA Advisory Council on nutrition guidelines. I mean, how was that, having that 3-minute block and telling that? And you spoke from your heart. You told your story, but you also gave them facts. So it was really unassailable. It was sort of like a 3-minute how to get a message across without putting anybody on the spot, but still getting the message across.
Well, I'm glad that it works for you. We got to have it make it work for them. I really appreciate that. It was my honor.
No, I think you moved the needle. I mean, they included soy in the substitute nutritional guidelines.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of they improved the plant-based language. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So the MyPlate recommendations say that when you look at it, it's essentially 80 to 100% of your plate should be plants. And as you pointed out, half they recommend are fruits and vegetables. Well, when AFA went and analyzed the 2020 subsidy data as soon as it was available, we found that over half of the money paid out that we were able to analyze, because there is like 20 to 25% of the money paid out are kind of uncategorized and you can't really tell who got them. But of the amount that we could categorize, over half supported the production of meat and dairy. So that includes propping up corn and soy, which, as you know, are primarily livestock feed for livestock. Soy like 70%, corn like 42%-ish.
So when you say 70% for soy, does that mean 70% of the cost of soy is subsidized, that farmers grow is subsidized by the American taxpayer?
Oh, so of the soy grown, 70% of the soy grown is fed to animals, is what I mean.
Oh, sorry. Okay, got it.
So if I remember correctly, the numbers were corn was something like $9 billion and soy was around $4 billion in subsidies. And
Is
then
that per
you
year?
prorate that for livestock per year. Yeah, that was just in 2020. The most heavily subsidized crop in America is corn, direct subsidies. But then we had a lot of direct payments. So the fiercely independent cattlemen received close to $9 billion as well, direct payments just for raising beef. And this is a product that is pretty universally understood among scientists and nutrition professionals and environmentalists to be one of the most problematic foods to produce from many perspectives, one of which is greenhouse gas emissions. So they were the most heavily subsidized of the livestock growers. And then you had dairy coming in close behind them. And then all told, subsidies last year were around $53 billion. Now, on a usual year, they're more like 20, 25 billion. But between the trade wars that the previous administration started and the COVID relief, you had a lot of just like showering money on people. And that money disproportionately went to cattle ranchers and dairymen.
So that 53 billion is to just the meat and dairy industry.
The 53 billion is total subsidies. And then a little over half of that supported livestock between livestock feed and direct subsidies to livestock producers. Roughly 28 billion went to supporting meat and dairy production.
Out of the 53, which was an ag subsidy.
Which was the total ag subsidy, right?
Got it.
And then for very little went to fruit producers, very little went to nuts. Almond growers got a lot. And you asked why, Dotsie? It's because whoever has lobbyists gets showered with money. The rule of thumb in DC is, well, there's a phrase, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And the fruit, most of the fruit and vegetable growers are not at the table. They are, but they don't have the number of people at the table as the cattlemen, as the dairy producers, and as the corn growers and soy producers. And almond growers have a lot of representation too. So you have all of these groups that are producing foods, and they're influencing food policy because they've recognized that for every dollar they put into lobbying, they can expect between $1,000 and $2,000 back in benefits.
Wow.
Either like tax breaks, direct subsidies, favorable regulations that don't hold them to account for polluting, or subsidies that pay for their pollution cleanup rather than them paying for it. Like there's a whole host of ways they can benefit, but that's typically the rule of thumb. For every dollar they put in, they get 1,000 back or 2,000.
Why aren't they at the table? Why isn't broccoli and pineapple and potatoes at the table? I mean, if I mean, we could talk about animal foods all day long, but if almonds are at the table, what are some of the reasons that they're not bringing, the others aren't bringing themselves to the table and hiring lobbyists?
I can't say for sure. From what I observed, it's how well organized the groups are. For the groups that are very organized and they get somebody taking a leadership role and they're good at raising the money among the group, there's a book called The Business of America is Lobbying. It's by Lee Drutman.
Okay.
And one of the main points he makes is that once a company, for example, starts lobbying and they realize that they get massive returns on lobbying, they keep pouring money back into it and they grow and grow and grow. And once these groups start, they grow. So like the Cattlemen's Association has been around for a long time, and the dairy groups have been around for a long time. So they've just had that benefit of being organized early, getting in on the action early, and they have tremendous influence as a result.
Yeah.
So you were vegan, but you realized that making a statement with your own consumer dollars wasn't big enough because the subsidies are so huge. And even all of us vegans fighting against these huge subsidies wasn't enough, and that a vegan needed to start lobbying. Can you tell me a little bit about what it means to lobby? Like, I think some of our audience might not really understand what a lobbyist is and what they do. We hear that term, but
yeah, so lobbying, there was a study in 2015 by Harvard, and they wrote a paper called Lobbying the Relationship Market. It's just relationships. So we hired our lobbyist, who we employ right now, because he has the relationships we want with the key people in agriculture committees. And he's great. I really like our lobbyist. And lobbying is what I was saying about those other groups getting organized and kind of realizing the benefits and continuing on. There's no reason that can't be us. So plant-powered environmentalists, vegans, animal rights activists, any environmentalists, we can band together and organize. And we've done the math. And if just 10% of vegans pool together $10 per month each, we can out lobby big animal ag, and not just out lobby them, but also out influence them, because lobbying is only one part of it. There's also campaign contributions, setting up PACs and running candidates. When you run a candidate and you finance their campaign, I mean, are they going to listen to you? Of course, they want to get reelected, right? And not to say that politicians are in any way bad. It's just the way our system works. I think a lot of people who are in office, they go into office because they think they can make a difference and they want to make meaningful change. But often their hands are tied because of who they have to not annoy, because those people are getting them reelected. They're funding their campaign. So in other words, if we organize, we can take a seat at that table, and we can populate that table with the politicians who are going to be favorable to what we want, and we can start making real change.
If we all, we know that we have some power against industry if we stop demanding their products, and
Right.
that's a journey. It's, happening more than it was. How long and how much do you think the government will continue to subsidize? And this is sort of taking out the if all the vegans gave $10 and we were to lobby, because I want to talk about that in a minute. But let's say we take that out. We're just in the current system now. How long do you think the government would subsidize these industries that no one wants anymore? That no one's consuming anymore, no one's demanding anymore?
As long as re-election hinges on making those industries happy, they'll continue to subsidize. I mean, the beef industry alone is the #1 ag product. It's last time I read, it was $66 billion a year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those guys aren't losing their slush fund anytime soon.
Yeah.
But I hear so much about farmers being on the edge and having these big meat and dairy. Well, I'm more in tune with the dairy issue, but that it's not, they don't make a ton of money, dairy farmers at least. So why? So where's this money going? All these subsidies, or is it just that they are so not the right business to be in that they need these subsidies even just to stay a little bit above water?
Well, you've got the large agribusinesses, and then you've got the small independent family farmers. And depending on the industry, you have a different distribution of who gets what. So in dairy, we're working with a couple small family farmers in Wisconsin who are lobbying with us, and they're really eager to transition because of many reasons, which we can get into. But they received a lot in direct cash payments last year through COVID and trade war relief, because really they're in districts that were politically advantageous for the administration. Like 90% of those payments went to Republican districts, which is just so incredibly partisan and wrong, right? When Obama gave $350 million out in like 2010 after a disaster, Congress actually wrote legislation to restrict how much money that the ag secretary could pay out to farmers, like from a slush fund, because they thought it was unduly partisan. Well, last year they blew it out of the water with like $23 billion in just slush fund payments. But in terms of mostly the big agribusinesses get the bulk of the subsidies. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that, so when some of the COVID payments were paid, they were kind of like COVID relief to everybody else, where everybody got a payment no matter what. But in terms of the regular everyday subsidies that kind of happen when there's not a big pandemic, you have to jump through some hoops to get those subsidies, right? And the large agribusinesses, they have people on staff whose jobs are to go apply for whatever grants they can get to get those subsidies, and make sure they're enrolled in ARC and PLC, and make sure they're enrolled in crop insurance at the right level. And the smaller farmers, they're farming 10 hours a day. They get home and they're like, oh, I don't want to deal with a government bureaucracy. And a lot of them are hearing, I mean, this is my personal take, but I'm sure a lot of them are hearing on public radio, or maybe not public radio, but on the radio, that the government can't do anything right, and it's just a big bureaucracy and you don't want to deal with them anyway. So they tend to not interact, and they tend to not apply for these loans. That's what we hear from farmers over and over again. Meanwhile, the AFA volunteers, we kind of did an undercover investigation. We called up the Farm Service Agency and NRCS, which is like the environmental side of it. And we asked some questions to find out like what our farmer friends in Wisconsin could get in order to help them transition from dairying to hazelnuts. Well, these public servants on the phone, they would spend a half hour with us, and they were bending over backwards to try to help us. Like, they want to help the small farmer get everything that they can get. And in the end, they had nothing for us because there are no programs for transitioning farmers. The USDA will spend $400,000 to help a farmer install a methane digester, but they won't give them $400,000 to help them transition from dairying to planting hazelnut trees for a hazelnut orchard, which is what we're lobbying for, to change that. But ultimately, I think it's just an economies of scale thing. The big guys, they hire the lobbyists. They get these programs put in place that are a little bit complicated and weird, and they're the only ones who apply for them.
Can you share with us about what your organization is working towards? Are you are you lobbying for a transition for farmers or for stronger broccoli lobby, et cetera?
Yeah, we have a long-term goal. So short-term goal is to get a program in place where the USDA agents can help farmers take money and put it toward transition as like a valid way of reducing emissions, for example, or reducing runoff from their farm into waterways. Right now, it's all other conservation measures. So they can change how they do what they're doing. They can't change what they're doing. So that's one thing we're lobbying for right now. And we have about 3 different avenues we're pursuing for that. So we'll see which one pans out. But that's just the short term. In the long term, the holy grail is the Farm Bill. So there's this 600-page piece of legislation that comes around roughly every 5 years. Dotsie's nodding along. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. The Agriculture Improvement Act is what it's sometimes called. And there are 12 titles. And what our strategy is, right now, we're identifying what we're calling OFIs, or opportunities for intervention. So our goal is to have a list of 100 opportunities for intervention in the Farm Bill that will nudge it toward plant-based production. So it would be like adding broccoli as an eligible producer onto a particular program, for example, or changing the minimum requirements for the number of types of farmers who get some sort of a subsidy. There's a ton of low-hanging fruit in there. I mean, every time I go in there hunting for OFIs, it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that this was part of the code. We could just tweak this word here and it would shift it toward plant-based manufacturers. And then there are other things where we're adding ideas, where if you add a clause to include like building up the plant-based food supply chain, in addition to other like supply chain issues, like under the LAMP program, there's all these weird programs all over the place. And it just takes reading through them and identifying these OFIs. So we have a coalition of people in AFA, and then we've recruited from other organizations. One was somebody you just recently interviewed from PCRM. We have some people from like Planet and Health. We have a volunteer who's working with GFI. So we're just doing the grunt work right now. And then the idea is if we can put together a good set of OFIs, then we'll invite other organizations to collaborate with us on moving those and getting those in the next Farm Bill. But we have to organize now, because the next Farm Bill is probably going to pass into law either in 2022 or 2023.
So in 2019, when I saw you in Washington, you spent 3 weeks. I don't know if it was exactly in that time frame, but some other time you spent 3 weeks lobbying in DC, and you had about 30 meetings during the three weeks that you were there. Tell us about, what was that like? Who did you meet? What was your pitch to these congressperson staff? Did you feel like you came out ahead? What were the positives? What were you frustrated by?
It was a learning experience, a huge learning experience. I went in and my strategy was to try to uncover before prescribing. So asking questions about their district, doing our research before we went in, understanding what their farm, their ag profile was, and what they cared about, and then asking what their office's take was on like strategies for greenhouse gas emissions reductions, that kind of thing. Ultimately, I think most of everybody I would say 29 of the 30 were kind of open to the program. They were just like, you need to tighten it up a bit. I'm not really sure where this would fit in the farm bill. And the lesson to me was, we need to do more homework before going in. We can't go, hey, can you do this thing? Oh, and by the way, you write the legislation for it. Like, they're busy.
Yeah.
You need to go in with legislation ready to go and say, this can fit into this pre-existing program, and it's going to be easy for you to, and here's the talking points, and it's going to be easy for you to sell it to everybody else as an item that doesn't raise any flags with the people who the other people you need to co-sign it are being elected by, who they rely on for re-election. So it has to be really palatable. And the other component of the learning, the other thing that really kind of struck me was how underfunded our legislative offices are. They didn't have enough staffers. Their office spaces were like falling apart. I remember in 30 Rock, there was an episode where Jack Donaghy went down to DC, and it was the guy from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. What's his name? Matthew Broderick.
Oh, yeah.
He was the DC guy, and like the whole episode was them joking about how underfunded it was. It was like, oh my God, it's actually true. Like, it's funny because it's true, but it's not funny. Like they're so understaffed that they can't. So when we back up to what I was saying, where you have to bring in legislation that's ready to go, that's horrifying. That's terrible. As a voter, I'm horrified, because I want my legislators writing legislation. I don't want the lobbyists writing legislation, but lobbyists write our legislation. So that was the third point that was really shocking, that really kind of hit home during that 3 weeks, was that lobbyists, they pretty much write a lot of the legislation.
Your ask was to subsidize farmers who want to transition out of dairy and meat farming.
Exactly.
Was it a nonpartisan issue, or did you find that it is partisan for us to ask for subsidies for farmers to transfer out of the animal ag industry and into fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds?
I found that the Democrats were, it was almost like it didn't matter what party they were in. Their main concern was whether it was pro-farmer and whether it was going to raise flags with the big ag groups, which, if you'll notice, being pro-farmer, like the little guy, that's not necessarily the big ag groups.
You can't be both. You can't be both, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Well, maybe there's some overlap, but the big ag groups, they say they're all about the small farmer, but really they're about the agribusinesses that are squeezing out every penny out of the supply chain and consolidating. All of those livestock industries have massively consolidated, where you just have a few players who are taking all the profits, and the suppliers, the people who own land and are supplying into it, well, so on one end, some of them are almost indentured servants, and on the other end, they may not be indentured servants, but they're not getting the 50 cents of every retail dollar. They're getting 14 or 15 cents of every retail dollar, and that's like the producers who are doing well. They're really not making the money they used to. So politicians are very concerned about the small farmer. And I think that's a genuine concern, but they're also very well aware of where their campaign contributions come from. And some of them, more than others, are receiving money from the big ag groups who aren't necessarily doing right by the small farmers. So they're in a tough spot. I would just want to pause at this point. Anybody listening who doesn't know what the For the People Act is, HR 1, please look it up, read it, go read a summary about it. It's like a few minor points. It gets money out of elections. The number one thing you can do to get our government back and stop this vicious spot our poor politicians are in. Like, I feel sorry for them. They wanted to serve their country and their hands are tied.
Well, they have to spend at least 4 hours a day raising money. They're actually sort of each party mandates each
Dial for dollars.
congressperson to go and spend 4 hours a day asking for money. It's not something they want to do.
Yeah, I think we taxpayers should maybe foot that bill. We can fund elections, no problem. So yeah, look up For the People Act, HR 1, and call your you have one representative in the House of Representatives. Call their office and just say, please vote for HR 1. I don't care if they've co-sponsored it yet or not. And then call your 2 senators and tell them to support For the People Act 2. It really needs to pass. And I'm so upset right now that it's looking like it's not going to.
I had not heard of HR 1. Is it something that's right before Congress now, or has it been coming up each legislative session?
Yeah, each legislative session. When I was back there and Vice News followed me around in February 2019, HR 1 had been introduced. And when I went to go see my rep, Anna Eshoo, my first comment was, before I even talk to you about what I came here for, thank you for co-sponsoring HR 1, and please keep that as your top priority. I mean, HR 1, it's already labeled as the majority House priority, but now's the year when it needs to pass, and we have one senator who's holding it up because he was heavily lobbied by a group that you can Google and find out who they are.
Oh, you can tell us on this show. I mean, I think it'd be helpful, unless you feel like you shouldn't.
I almost don't even want to name them. Just like, I don't want to be on their radar.
Okay. Well, let me. So is it because I would think that politicians would want to relieve themselves of this burden of having to raise so much money every time they run, especially people in the House of Representatives who have to run every 2 years.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, however, since Citizens United, the limits are off now. So if you are in a party where you can align with a PAC that's run by very well-heeled people who are willing to throw a lot of money into that PAC, all of a sudden you don't have to raise money.
Because the PAC will do it for you. Well, yeah.
The PAC has the money.
But you still have to dial for dollars for each party, and it just
for the part. Yeah,
it's
surprising. But I don't think as much.
It just surprises me that these politicians wouldn't find it so much easier to not have to worry about money.
I think the vast majority of them would like to not have to call some random constituent and ask for $1,000. Really? Is that what I want my representative doing?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
I want to talk some about some of the biggest hurdles that our farmers face when it comes to transitioning, and small ones, but also medium size. In 2019, we were starting to think about working with Miyoko's for a dairy farm transition that is right in Central California, dairy country, that was going to be used possibly as an R&D facility for Miyoko. So funded, with some of the new things that new ingredients that she's working on putting in her cheese, like fava beans and oats. And this farmer, let's call him Bob, has 4 children and a $5,000 a month mortgage. It's not a small dairy farm. There's 300 head cattle, so it's not tiny. And he had currently missed 2 mortgage payments, and it was $495,000 in debt in his dairy farm, and was desperately looking for a way to transition. And it was open enough and kind of has been multi-generational and is a leader in Central California in the dairy industry. And so we learned that maybe if he was interested in transitioning, that a lot of other farmers would be too, because there's quite a bit of generational pride around dairying, as we know. And so there were multiple issues with the transition. But one of the main ones was the soil, and making sure, or testing and seeing if the soil was going to be able to take fava beans or oats or whatever it might be, because it had been used for dairying for so many generations. And I learned that there's different types of soil that can be faster in their transition, and others that can't be, because what it had been through for so many years. And some of his soil, they said, would take up to 6 years potentially to be able to be healthy enough. Well, I should say healthy enough. I mean, healthy enough to be able to grow the beans and the oats that they wanted to put there. And so then therein lies a major roadblock. Well, what do you do for 6 years? Because you have to get the cows off for the soil to be able to regenerate itself. So what happens? What happens for 6 years? So that was my schooling in understanding one major roadblock that can happen with transitioning. Because before, I mean, I was naive. It was like, just plant some, hazelnut trees, like you said. It's not that hard. I'll come help you. But no, that's very naive. What are some of the other roadblocks that you're seeing? Because you're in it, you're in this work, you're deep in not just dairy farms, but beef farms, and I imagine chicken farms and all sorts of different. What are the major roadblocks that you're seeing for these transitions and not taking place?
Well, one big one is choosing what crop to transition to.
Mm-hmm.
One of the challenges is that the farm policy is such that it almost picks winners and losers in terms of what crops people can plant. So you've got like commodity programs where it lists very specific commodities that can be covered. Well, these commodity programs are revenue protections. So if your yields don't quite come out to what's expected, or prices drop and your revenues aren't quite what they expected, the federal government will make you whole through these programs, or close to whole. And well, that's a big deal for a farmer. Like, it takes out a lot of the risk. And it's probably wise to have programs like that, but it's limited to a handful of commodity crops like soybeans and corn and cotton, and a lot of the crops that aren't necessarily what we want people to plant for making the input costs of the plant-based foods lower, which is something that we're interested in. So that's one thing. The risk is high. Their list of like landing pad crops to transition to is small if they want to tap into the existing government programs to lower their risk. Also, you have an issue where the distribution networks, unless you're going into that small list, if you want to go into fava beans or hazelnuts, well, what's your distribution network? A dairy farmer, Dan, who we're working with, he said, look, Laura, I fill up the tank with the milk and I drive it down to the end of my driveway, and they come along and they just pump it into their container truck, and then not container truck, but tanker,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know what you call it.
But the system's all set up, is what you're saying. Like it's all
set up. He just needs to focus on making his product, and it gets picked up at the doorstep practically. Well, if when he switches to hazelnuts, fortunately for him, there's a group in Wisconsin called the Savannah Institute, which is really focused on helping farmers plant food forests, hazelnuts, pecans, walnuts. So I think they're working on the distribution network, but it's not there. But there's so much potential because, like, for example, hazelnuts, it's the one that I look at the most. We have to import those from Turkey. Like, it's a national security thing. It's like, hey, if you want it made in America, support these farmers and develop these supply networks. So that's something we're also lobbying for. But that's definitely a huge challenge. They don't want to take on something that's like a fly-by-night risk. They would rather go with, okay, well, I'm just going to plant soy. Well, the two farmers we're working on, they're super into restorative agriculture and restoring their land rather than doing monocropped soy and corn. They want to get away from that. So they're kind of open to taking a little risk, but they're very worried. And the thing is, if they have a transition program to help them transition, that takes a lot of the risk out. But that's not the whole story. That's why we're lobbying for the Farm Bill, because we have to get those supply chains robust where it's affordable for them to develop. And we could wait for private industry, but why? When there's $53 billion being showered on the existing ag producers, how about we just shift those over to the people who are kind of disrupting the system and coming up with the next generation of foods? Let's just shift it over to them and accelerate the process.
If you have farmers growing soy and corn, aren't they just basically feeding their dairy neighbors, and they're not really, as you said, disrupting the system? What kind of crops? You mentioned crops, and you mentioned you focused on hazelnuts. I love Nutella, I have to say, but other than that, I don't eat a lot of hazelnuts. I'm wondering why you're focused on hazelnuts, and what kind of crops, that small group of crops you said are the alternatives. What are they? Which ones are they?
Yeah, we've identified, so I talk about hazelnuts because it just so happens that the two dairy farmers we're working with, they are super all about hazelnuts and they're really jazzed about it. So they're going to hazelnuts and they're planting.
Okay,
as
I'm going
much
to
as
eat
they
more
can.
hazelnuts.
You know, we pull data. GFI is Good Foods Institute is an amazing organization. Oh my gosh, the data they put together. I don't think we could do what we're doing without just ripping off their homework and taking it into school. So like fava beans, mung beans, quinoa is one, for example. It's considered a commodity, but it's not eligible for the commodity protections. So like that's an easy OFI, the opportunities for intervention. Just, hey, add quinoa to the list. That's one that's coming on. And then we'll get rid of that argument saying, oh, you're bringing quinoa from another country where, you know, the farming system isn't fair to the workers. And okay, well, I'm buying my quinoa from America because now it's covered as a commodity.
When you talk to folks, what is your strongest argument about transitioning farmers, especially when you talk to staffers, congressional staffers? Is it the environment, climate change, the poor farmer? What is your main, the health of America, eating more vegetables? How do you, what did you find was the argument that most resonated with the folks with whom you spoke when you went to DC?
This is an additional option, a lifeline for farmers. Mm-hmm. Farmers are stuck. They don't have a lot of options. This is just one of many. It's an additional option that they can use. And for those who want to transition, USDA programs should be there to help. We did the most interesting man meme, the Dos Equis guy. We did one of those memes that was, not all livestock farmers want to transition, but for those who do, USDA programs should be there to help.
Yeah.
It's that kind of a message, right? It's like, well, why not? See if there are any takers. And hey, bonus, you transition this farm that has 600 head of dairy cows to hazelnut orchard, and boom, you've reduced our methane emissions by 200 tons per year, and you're no longer leaching nitrates into the nearby waterways. It's a huge win, and you're sequestering carbon in those trees.
Was there a difference in states in terms of how the openness to this idea of transitioning?
Yes. We've talked with a few reps in Wisconsin because obviously we have farmers there, although we've located farmers in other states too and talked with reps in like Michigan, which is handy because that's the chair of the Senate Ag Committee. But they are all pro small farmer. We ran into sometimes we would get a bit of an objection, like we're coming off like we're blaming the farmer, even though all our language is about offering opportunities for the farmer to just change what they're doing. They're not stopping farming. They're not going into high tech. They're just changing what their land produces. But once in a while, we would get a little backlash like, well, are you saying dairy farmers are bad? Well, no, but 10% of them went out of business in Wisconsin alone in 2019. Maybe consider options outside of the menu of possibilities you've been considering till now.
Why are dairy farmers having such trouble?
Well, there's a document put out by the USDA. The USDA, by the way, puts out incredibly informative information and in really digestible formats. I mean, I got to give props to some of the people working at like NASS and ERS, and some of the documents they put together where they don't just like report the data, they actually put together a story. And they did a document called The Changing Landscape of Dairy. I think they published it a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago now. But if I remember correctly, like 50 years ago, there were roughly 600,000 dairy farms, and now there's like 20,000 dairy farms. So a dairy farm is anywhere that you have a dairy cow producing milk that you sell. So it could, back then, you would have a lot of family farms that had like 3 cows, and they would count as a dairy farm. But now you have farms like, what is it, Three Canyon in Oregon that has 70,000 milking cows across 3 properties. You have all those dairies in California. Those are huge. I mean, Dotsie, you mentioned that one farmer with 300 as being a big dairy. I mean, that's
well, no. I said he was just
dairies.
not a teeny tiny. I mean, definitely
well, he
that wasn't big.
Teeny, right? Yeah. But for California, I was thinking, how did you find a farm with only 300 cows in California? Because when like Judy Mancuso of SCIL was looking for farmers, we went and called. We went and hunted for farmers. We have this one volunteer who we call the farmer whisperer, because she'll just get on the phone and start talking to people. She's super friendly. They like her, and they want to work with us. And these are dairy farmers typically. But she tried calling, and they were just way too huge. And so like these programs are more for small and mid-size, like up to $1 million in revenue per year, not people bringing in $10 million per year. So it was really hard to find a dairy farmer in California. So Judy, if you're listening, sorry, we tried.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're all consolidated. And then you have this weird thing where, like in Wisconsin, is a lot of small farms. It's like 1,000 small farms now, and they make like organic dairy. They're really proud of it. But then states like Texas, they kind of let their dairy farmers, their huge dairies, flout the organic laws. At least this is my understanding, listening to farmers talk about it amongst themselves. I'm not interjecting in this. And it undercuts the Wisconsin dairy farmers, because the Texas dairy will get sold as organic, but the costs to produce it are really small. So the reason why you went from 600,000 dairies down to like 20,000 dairies is because a couple things. One is, once a dairy gets big enough, when you read this document about the changing landscape, it's eye-popping that how quickly the unit costs, the input costs come down as you scale up with volume. The economies of scale just kick in real quickly. So a 200 cow dairy cannot compete on cost against a 2,000 head dairy. It's just impossible. And then on top of that, you have a lot of consolidation going on in the dairy industry. And my understanding is that it lagged like the chicken industry, but it's happening. And that dates back to the Packers and Stockyard Act getting stripping the USDA of jurisdiction over busting up monopolies in the ag system. And they said, oh, that has to be in DOJ. Well, then the USDA, whose eyes are on ag, their hands are tied. And so they had to sit by and watch all these huge agribusinesses just get bigger and bigger and monopolize the entire space. So between the economies of scale and the monopolization in the industry, you have this happening. That's my understanding. I'm sure there is more going on there, but
well, there's the loans. I mean, we talked to Leah Garces from Mercy for Animals about chicken farmers and the mandates that they get from new laws being passed about the things they have to do to conform, put a stranglehold on them, and they have to, or their distributor wants, bigger barns or something and certain things, and they have to comply. Otherwise, they're not going to have anyone distribute their product, and that makes them have to take out really large loans. And I imagine that happens with dairy farmers too, whether it be environmental laws, just because and these are good laws, environmental laws that mandate the digesters and what's going to happen to the different ways of dealing with waste, cow waste. These are all really important, but they cost a lot of money.
Yeah. And it really puts the farmer in the most fragile position of the entire chain. Yeah. Because with the animals, right? Because animals get sick, got all the risk. They die, and they have all the risk and very little of the upside. What are some other bright spots that you're seeing, that you feel there's some hope in as it relates to changing laws for animals in the environment? In Congress and in the Senate,
well,
is there some hope? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, specifically in DC, I'm really energized by a few organizations like GFI is doing groundbreaking work. I think they alone are accelerating cell-based research for cultured meat and plant-based food. The data they put out is invaluable, and you take it to politicians and they're like, okay, yeah, GFI, I trust this organization. Like they give me hope. The fact that the plant-based food organizations are organizing and the PBFA under Rachel Dreskin now, I talked with her about a few weeks ago, and I think she's really on it. I think they have money behind them and they will just snowball. I'm hoping they snowball faster than the Cattlemen's Association snowballed, and they will be a huge force. AFA, we have corporate sponsors like Hungry Planet Foods and All Y'all's Jerky, but we're not like a trade organization. So we don't have quite the money they do, but our hands are also not tied. Like the challenge with a trade organization is that you can lobby for sort of the lowest common denominator of what all the different groups want. Well, PBFA has a challenge because some of their members aren't like ethical vegan groups. They're big agribusinesses that also are funding the other trade associations. But they have a small plant-based division because they want to see if they can get there. Whereas AFA, we can lobby for whatever we want because our members are like, let's bring fairness to the farm bill, level the playing field, make it so that the small independent vegetable plant-based producers can get subsidized just like the big guys. So those two organizations give me a lot of hope, and I really look forward to working with them and coordinating with them in DC. And then other points of hope are in like the UK, they just passed, or in the EU, they just passed legislation banning cages in animal agriculture, if I understand. Like that's huge.
Yeah.
we can look at these bright spots around the world and take an example from them and say, hey, if they could do it, why can't we? Like it broadens your imagination of the solution space.
Mm-hmm. There's a group also called Lobbyists for Good. I want to get to the part of this podcast where we talk about action, because we know voting or calling our Congress to vote for HR1. You've given us that action step. Can regular people be lobbyists with Lobbyists for Good, or a group of people rise up and lobby for something that they care about?
Yeah, so Billy Delancey is the founder of Lobbyists for Good, and he was our first lobbyist. We hired him after that Vice News, or that February 2019 lobbying ordeal experience. And I think he's still running it. So if you have like a cause you want to crowdfund $5,000 for, to go to DC or have him lobby on your behalf, that's a great place to start. I would invite people to join us at AFA too. You can volunteer, and you can be part of that 10% pooling, $10 a month, and we can out lobby animal ag. I mean, we really can do it. We have a couple programs. We have something called the Champions Club, and we have 11 members so far, and we're trying to get to 50 by the end of the summer. And once we have 50, we can hire another lobbyist. So that's where people are giving $200 a month. But people can even join for $1 a month if they want, and be part of our community. And joining AFA, we are going to have more and more calls to action to actually go lobby congressmen. I also kind of want to put the idea in people's heads to get active locally. Like, did you know property taxes are set at the county level? And often people just they'll buy a plot of land and stick some cows on it to get the favorable rates. Well, you can go talk to your county council and your county legislators and find out what or policymakers, and find out do a little research. What are the property tax laws? And maybe you can just go call a meeting and say, hey, agriculture is taxed at the most favorable rate. How about you make it so that rewilded land is taxed at that rate minus 10%? Because, and then do some work. See, if X number of acres go to rewilded land, maybe it'll help them make their countywide climate goals for 2030. And it's like a way to slip in there. So you can get active at your local level. Yeah. And at your city council, go look up Green Mondays and pitch Green Mondays to them. Get that instituted at your city level. It's a real easy yes for legislators. It socializes the idea of plant-based eating as a means to climate action. And they too are looking for things that they can check mark their name next to and say, look, I did something for the climate.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I really like your podcast. My favorite was Daniel Negreanu, because he is my poker hero.
Yes.
I think
she's a gambler too.
Not shocking.
I used to, when I was had my son and I was breastfeeding at 3 a.m. in 2006, I would, Max would be on my milking himself, and I would be watching World Series of Poker. And Daniel Negreanu was by far my favorite player. He was amazing. Him and Phil Ivey were both pretty good. Anyway, I love your podcast, so thank you so much for having me on. Where people can find us, agriculturefairnessalliance.org. We're on Instagram, all the major social medias at Ag Fairness Alliance. And I would invite people to go to our website on agriculturefairnessalliance.org. And if you wait around for 60 seconds, I think you'll get a pop-up. Give us your email and we'll just send you little bits of information about ag subsidies at the federal level and things you can do to make a change.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
It's fun to learn how it all works. Thanks so much. Hey, folks. Okay. back by very popular demand, is our plant-powered plate fridge magnet, which you are going to receive for free if you leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So here are the details. Just write your quick review. Does not need to be long, does not need to be a whole story. Just be honest and speak from the heart. Then take a quick screenshot of the review you wrote and email it to us at podcast@switchforgood.org. That's podcast@switchforgood.org. And include your mailing address so we can send you a power plate. We are doing this because the more reviews we garner, the higher we go in search results, which means more folks will learn about our podcast. So the power is in your hands. Leave us a review and zoom, your power plate arrives at your doorstep.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.